Alrighty. Good evening, everybody. If your computer is in the room, please mute it. Okay. Thank you for joining us tonight for the August 18th Proposition 2.5 Override Information Forum. Tonight, we're going to provide some factual information about the override. Before our town staff gets started and school staff, I will provide some housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded live on RCTV. We do have various boards and committees that posted their agendas. So at this time, if you're in the Zoom, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. If you're in the room, we will also call to order. We'll start with the select board, then we'll do finance committee and school committee if you guys are in attendance.
Chris Haley,
Here.
is anyone online? I'm sorry, I'm not logged into Twitter.
I do not see anyone online. And then for housekeeping, when you do speak into these microphones, just try to speak as close as you can so it picks it up on Zoom. Yeah. Okay. Anyone from the finance committee?
I mean, I'm oops.
Okay.
Mary Ann Downing is here and Emily Sisson. I don't know who's in the room, if anyone's in the room.
Yeah, Joe's here. Is that two? Is that...
So that's only 3 of us so far.
Okay. We do not have a quorum for FinCom.
That's good.
Moving on to school committee.
Committee doesn't have quorum yet either.
Oh.
Still don't have quorum, but we have four FinCom now.
Okay. Okay. If a fifth shows up, we will call to order. And then lastly, for the Q&A, we will do Q&A at the very end. If you are on Zoom, here are some instructions at the bottom of the screen. Please raise your hand when we get to the Q&A section, and we will call on you. If you would rather type your questions, you can do the Q&A section. We will read them out loud for anyone on Zoom. All right, and then I think we'll get started. Moving on to Jane Wellman.
Thanks, Josh. Can you hear me? Great. Marianne, you can hear me? All right. You're my at-home person.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
I think
Thank you
Emily's
very
at
much.
home too, right? Or
Yep,
I beg your pardon?
I can hear too.
I was just going to say Emily's at home as well, but we can hear you.
Okay. So thanks for coming tonight. We've budgeted about 90 minutes for this presentation, but I'll stay here and take questions as long as we get them. So next slide, please. So we're here tonight because the select board voted on July 28th to put Proposition 2.5 operational override on the November 3rd ballot for $6.5 million. What's the bottom line? So we have a proposed budget. It's a level 2 budget at 3.75% increase across the board. A level 2 budget, just for the folks at home, is level 1 is the department head requests for their budget. Level 2 is when the town manager comes through and makes a number of cuts and adjustments, and then that's the level 2 budget. And then the next level 3 will be finance committee.
Excuse me, speaking of finance committee, can I call us to order now because I see Ed Ross on the panel and I think now we have 5.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm just gonna take a roll call. I'll do the online. Emily Sisson,
Here.
Ed Ross, if you can just like raise your hand virtually or something. Or unmute. Well, anyway, yep, thank you. And then in person, Chris Cook,
Present.
Joe Carnahan,
Present.
and then Mary Ann Downing present. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, Jane.
Okay, well, that was a good segue, so thank you for that. I did that for you, Finance Committee. That worked out great. So additionally, to that 3.75% increase, in order to maintain educational excellence for our school department, The school department comes in at 5.25% increase, and that's achieved through a community priority of $917,000. So we set the budget at 3.75% increase across the board, and to get to the school department's request, it's an additional $917,000. So the proposed override is $6.5 million. We will still need to use a supplement of free cash of about $3 million in order to fulfill that budget should this override pass. We can phase it in over 2 years if the select board chooses to go in that direction. So that would be maybe 5 million in the first year, 1.5 the second. I'm not sure that's the best way to go, but we have some options. And this override will last 3 to 5 years. It is very dependent on inflationary pressures as we go forward. I think it's important to remember that right now in FY27, we have a $6.5 million structural deficit. That is the amount of free cash we are using to fill the hole in our budget. Next year, that structural deficit will grow to $9.8 million. We cannot fill that hole with free cash anymore. That's how we've been solving the structural deficit for a few years, is supplementing this structural deficit with free cash. And when we had $19 million in free cash and we were using $2 million to, close that gap, that was sustainable. Because of these high inflationary pressures, because accommodated costs that we cannot control, have far exceeded 2.5% that we have under Prop 2.5. The structural deficit has grown, and it has exceeded the amount of money that we regenerate annually in free cash. Next slide, please. So cost drivers. Decades of insufficient local aid from Beacon Hill. UGA, which is a portion of aid that we get from the state, which stands for Unrestricted General Government Aid, is basically been flat since the Great Recession, since 2008. It came up a little bit in 2006 and then it drops. I can show a slide on that later if we need to, but local aid from Beacon Hill has been insufficient. Chapter 70 funding has gone up, but it has not been able to keep pace with inflation. FY27 was the start of a new 5-year trash contract, as most folks know. That trash contract, we had a great deal with JRM, and those days are over. That was a 10-year contract, and it was fantastic. We went out and we did a competitive bidding process through the landscape, and our trash contract, our hauling for trash and recycling, is going up 39.5%. And we have a plan to decrease that amount by 8% in FY28 by moving to biweekly recycling. Inflationary pressures, as we talked about previously, fuel, labor, benefits, affects everything. Health insurance has skyrocketed in recent years and adds tremendous uncertainty. We always plan for 10% increases. Last year, we were looking at, for FY27, I think initially a 15% increase. Is that correct, originally?
With the GLP-1s, but
Yeah.
now it's like 10.86.
Yeah. Our insurance coverage ended coverage for GLP-1s unilaterally, so that 15% ended up not happening. And then it went to 10. More on that in a minute. We have high cost software expenditures and other inputs like building security, our computer aided dispatch, and parking enforcement. And then insurance policies we have for the new buildings are estimated right now at $230,000 coming in. Both of those buildings will come online in FY28. Recal, the Reading Center for Active Living, will be coming online in August, and the new Killam Elementary School will be coming online in February. Josh, next slide. So what we've done so far, back to the health insurance, we've renegotiated our health insurance agreement with our Public Employee Committee. Health insurance in municipalities is a bargained benefit. And so the Public Employee Committee is made up of representatives from each of our employee unions, and it is a bargained benefit. So we are grateful to our employees. We are projecting a $3.9 million savings over the next 3 years of this contract. And I think our increase for FY27 ended up, instead of being over 10, was like 5.71.
5.17, yeah.
5.17. I do that sometimes. Um, So anyway, we renegotiated our property and casualty insurance with our carrier because we had a tremendously beneficial loss ratio. And we did lower our insurance payments on property and casualty. We are leaving positions unfilled. And as we are seeing attrition, we are continuing to leave some positions unfilled if they are not critically important positions. We have increased fees across many of our departments, most recently the fire department. We've cut office supplies by 10%. That's an easy off-the-top thing that can be done. And we've reduced our capital budget from 5% to 4.5%. By policy, Reading carries 5% to pay for capital and debt every year. And so we've reduced that this year by policy to reduce some of that expenditure. And then finally, great news is that our pension will be fully funded by FY32. And so we estimate that will make available about $3 million for operational expenses in FY32. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand this over now to Sharon Engstrom, our CFO, to get a little bit more into the financial nitty gritty. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Jane. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I'm using a guide. She nodded. Good. Okay, good. So we're going to start by going over our reserve status, the free cash that Jane spoke of that we've been using to fill the structural deficit. So at the beginning of fiscal 26, we had $17.3 million of free cash. And then we had November town meeting uses of free cash and April town meeting uses of free cash, leaving us with just over $8.7 million remaining. Then we had estimated regeneration. What's regeneration? Regeneration is essentially municipalities have a balanced budget, and so we budget for revenues and expenses to be equal. So if you collect more revenues than you budgeted, that's regeneration from the revenue. If you spend less on expenses than you budgeted, that's regeneration as well. So the estimated regeneration that we have here for fiscal 26 is $3.89 million for the revenue side and approximately about $1 million on the expense side, giving us a grand total of just over $13.6 million, just over $13.6 million of free cash remaining. We also maintain reserves in the stabilization fund of just over $2.1 million and then $200,000 of FinCom reserves. Overall, our reserves would be just shy of $16 million estimated, which represents about 12% of our estimated revenues for fiscal 27. FinCom does maintain a 7% minimum reserve policy. However, in order to maintain our AAA bond rating, we do need to be in that 15 to 20% range. So we're already kind of in danger of our AAA bond rating being jeopardized. Next slide, please. This slide shows in blue our reserves, which is our free cash plus our stabilization, as compared to that 7% reserve that we spoke of at the last slide. You'll see that in the earlier years on this slide, our actual reserves well exceeded that 7%. As the last couple of years have gone by, you see that we were eating away at those reserves. And if fiscal 26 and 27 play out the way it looks like we'll be at 7% at the end of fiscal 27. So the assumptions built into fiscal 26 is a regeneration number of $3 million. That's with expenses and revenue regeneration. We used $8.57 million in the fiscal 26 budget. So the actual use is being used there and the estimate there for fiscal 26. And then if we use the same amount of money that we used in fiscal 27, 6.475, if we use that in fiscal 27 to support the fiscal 28, we would be butting up right with that 7%, which is less than ideal. So we're certainly not recommending that. Next slide, please. So this slide shows free cash used with the blue and then regeneration in red. In earlier years, our use was well below in most years what we actually regenerated. But in recent years, we've started to use more free cash than we actually regenerate. So we're depleting our reserves and have gotten to a point where we've used up all the excess reserves we really have. And we really do need to ask for the override at this point, even though it's the less than ideal time. Next slide, please. So this slide is the structural deficit that we face, and I've summarized it since the last time we've shown it just to make it a little bit more digestible. These are our accommodated costs. Our accommodated costs, the way our budget is built, we always project our revenues first, and then we project our accommodated costs because those costs have to be paid no matter what. And so we take them off the top before the school and the town split what remains. And so the categories for accommodated cost are benefits, debt, energy, financial, out-of-district special ed, vocational schools, and miscellaneous. The financial section, I figure I can point out what makes that up because that's not intuitive. The financial is actually property and casualty and veterans assistance. And the miscellaneous section is rubbish and snow and ice and state assessments. So the reason I'm showing you this slide is fiscal 20 to fiscal 26, we have significant growth in these line items. And growth that I would say fits outside of what we can afford for a Prop 2.5 budget. So the reason I'm showing you this like this is so you can see how much from fiscal 20 to fiscal 26 these line items have increased, what the percentage of that change is. So you can see that first line, benefits, is up 71.75% over a 7-year period. We would expect each year to be more like 2.5 to 3%. So that next column, that expected net change, is about 17.5. That's what easily can be afforded in a Prop 2.5 budget. So the difference between that net change of $8,197,000 and the almost $3 million that is our expected change for benefits is $5.2 million towards the structural deficit. That's $5.2 million more than can really be afforded within our budget. So if you look at each line item, you can see that debt is up almost $1 million over what we would expect that 17.5% to be. Energy is up $576,000. The financial section is up $305,000. The out-of-district special ed is up over $508,000. Vocational schools, almost $1 million. We have a new school being built there in Wakefield, and so we are getting a capital charge around $300,000 or $360,000 a year, and it is proportional to the number of students that we have going to those schools, and it seems like enrollment in those schools are going up, so we're getting a larger piece of that debt service every year, as well as the operational costs. And then under accommodated costs, miscellaneous, as we spoke, that's snow and ice, rubbish, and state assessments. That's up almost $1.3 million above where Prop 2.5 can afford at that 17.5%. Next slide, please. So the grand total was $9.8 million of a structural deficit, and this shows it graphically so you can see the categories. The light green represents what that 17.5% over 7 years looks like. And the dark green is what actually happened. And you can see benefits is way past where it needs to be. Every single line item is outside of what really can be afforded in a Prop 2.5 budget or 17.5%. I mean, it could be a little bit more. Some of them could be like 3, 4%, but a lot of these numbers grew well outside of the 3 or 4%, some of them in double digits, many of them in double digits in some years. So this is where the concern is. This is where we cannot control the cost, and we have to fill in that excess and have been filling it in with free cash and have gotten to the point where we've used up the reserves we had available and do need to request an override. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows you the last time we asked for an override or the history of our overrides. 1993, we got just over $2.4 million, and we made that last for 10 years. In 2003, we had $4.5 million of an override. We made that last for 15 years. And then in 2018, we got a smaller override, $4.15 million, and we've made that last about 9 years, which is pretty good because we did say that that would only last 3 to 5 years. So we have been good stewards with the money that has been given to us by way of override. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing you the impact of the override. So the average assessed value of a home here in Reading is about $944,000, and the average tax bill is about $10,348. And that's the fiscal 26 average bill, which we did not have any excluded debt on the fiscal 26 bills. And so you didn't see any impact of the Killam or recal debt in the fiscal 26 bills. So we want to make sure that that is known. The first tranche of debt did show up in your fiscal 27 bills, and I'm sure you noticed. It added about $60.19 per $100,000 of assessed value. We borrowed about 60% of what we needed for both those projects. The average home would have seen a $568 increase related to that first tranche of debt. But it is worth noting that both projects are coming in well below what the actual costs that we estimated were. So I don't anticipate the second tranche of debt to be as big as it would have been. That 40% would probably be much less, although I don't have the exact figures at this point. We are seeing significant savings on both projects. So when I have those numbers, we will give an update of what kind of impact that second tranche is estimated to be. And that $6.5 million override that we're requesting would cost the average home $736 or 78 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. Next slide. This slide shows the situation that we're in terms of, for a 3.75% budget, if an override were to fail, what would we need to do? And what is the estimated number of positions that would need to be cut, or position equivalents, because we could cut in other areas of expenses, although we've been running very leanly on both the town and the school side. So there isn't much expenses left to cut. So the assumption is most of these cuts would be positions. So if we were to use $4 million of free cash and we split the cuts the way we split the money, so about 64% school and about 36% town, we would be looking at for a $4 million, if we use $4 million, it would be 53 positions, or 34 school positions and 19 town. If we use $3 million, it would be 67 positions, 43 school, 24 town. We do show it in a 50-50. We haven't decided how that would be split if that were to come up, but just to get a feel for how many positions are in jeopardy, if we only use $2 million, 80 positions would need to be cut, 51 school and 29 town. And then obviously if we cut it, it would be 40-40. The average salary on the town side is about $85,000 with $15,000 of benefits. So each position is worth about $100,000. We found that on the school side, the salaries are the average is about 100, but the benefits sit on the town side. So it kind of equals out. Each person is pretty much $100,000. You also can see that the town has 249 employees and the school has 623. So you can see that the percentages of cuts in any one of these options would be very large, very impactful, and I think you would notice it in your service levels, because those cuts are too large not to. So I bring that up just to make sure that you're aware that the percentage of staff that we're looking to cut here is a very large percentage. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent, Dr. Turner.
Thank you so much. I'm joined tonight by school committee members Tom Wise and Erin Geffen, as well as our finance director, Phil Littlehale. This is week 6 of my superintendency, and over the course, thank you. Over the course of this time, I have learned so much about the district, and just want to thank community members, parents, employees who have been taking my entry survey, in which this topic has been one of the questions, some of the ways in which people have given me feedback. And also people have been taking me up on my office hours, joining me in my office and sharing their perspective of what's going on in the community, what's going on in the school district. And it's clear to me that there is a sense of energy that's going on in the Reading Public Schools. There's a feeling of the improvements that have happened over the last several years, and an excitement for the future of the district. That's something that's clear both at all levels of our district, and something that people feel really good about. That's one of the big takeaways I've made over this summer. Next slide, please. So what you'll see tonight is an overview of how that story has been created over the last several years, which one aspect you will hear is that Reading Public Schools has remained fiscally lean over the last several years with some clear targeted investments that has demonstrated significant results in terms of student academic outcomes and also connection to school socially and emotionally. Through those investments, what you'll also learn is what level service budget looks like at 5.25% and why that's necessary for the district to continue with its work that has continued on over the last several years, and the impacts of what would happen with a failed override. Next slide, please. So I'll start just by showing the fiscal realities of Reading Public Schools. Is that over the last several years, there has been some creative ways in thinking about how to demonstrate some revenue to bring money into the district. One of those ways is school choice, and so we have starting, as you'll see in the slide to the diagram to the right, since 2023, an increase of students from out of district, out of Reading, coming to the Reading Public Schools. What this slide shows is the revenue that has increased. What this slide doesn't show is that is the number of students who are coming to Reading versus who are leaving Reading. And what you'll find is that there are very few students who are leaving Reading Public Schools, particularly in comparison to the number of students who are coming to Reading. What shows is that our academic improvements are making waves across the area, and people want to come to the Reading Public Schools. While we have, so school choice is one of the ways in which we have increased revenue. We've also made some thoughtful decisions around reducing some subscriptions, some educational platforms, reduce spending effective next year or this school year around professional development and conferences. And support functions across the district have remained flat for the last several years. That includes central administrators, paraprofessionals, custodians, and administrative assistants. Next slide, please. Another way in which revenue has been generated is students coming in into Reading through special education from other districts. And you'll see that over the last 3 years, there's been a significant increase in revenue from that. So what that means is that students who are on IEPs, who can place into some of our programs. We have an 18 to 22-year-old program, for example. And those are students who are getting their needs met here in Reading, are not taking seats from Reading students, and we're receiving tuition from their districts, as well as additional support, such as a paraprofessional from those districts if necessary. And again, this reinforces the message from the students who are tuitioning in, where families are paying, in this situation, their school district is paying, is that that families want to come to the Reading Public Schools who don't live in Reading. And that, I think, is something for us to be proud about, but also to see that that we are able to generate revenue that way. We also generate revenue through fees. Athletics is one of those ways. Athletic fees where families are paying fees. And so what the slide to the right shows is that even though we have increased fees over the last few years, we still generate a loss in terms of our costs for athletics. The reason for that, and for those of you who don't know me, I was a high school principal for the last 15 years, and so have a lot of knowledge about athletics and its costs, is that transportation has been the biggest increase. It's for those who may have heard in the news, it's hard to find bus drivers, let alone buses, and bus companies have been jacking up their prices as a result, and it's also due to energy costs for buses as well. And so due to transportation costs as well as coaching stipend increases, we've seen a significant increase in terms of overall cost of athletics. Next slide, please. What this slide shows you is the overarching message that I had shared with you, is that Reading remains fiscally lean. When we compare Reading Public Schools to like districts in terms of size and academic output, what you will find is that we have a lower per pupil expenditure than nearby districts and like districts. We are also lower than the state average. And so despite there have been increases across the board in terms of per pupil expenditure, is that Reading remains below the state average and below our peer districts. Despite that, we have grown over the last 8 years from the 70th percentile in comparison to districts to the 90th percentile in terms of MCAS output on grades from grades 3 to 8 who are assessed on MCAS. That's extraordinary to say that we are among the best districts in the state, that we have grown at that rate on a measurable assessment. That's a testament to the amazing work of our students, of our families and their support, and of the staff. And it is also a credit to the really smart investments that the district has made over the last few years to support students so that they feel supported in school, that their needs are met, and so that they can perform academically. And so it's a comprehensive level of support that we're seeing, and that's leading to this increase. Next slide, please. And so what this shows is that there's also been investments. I just was speaking about 3rd through 8th grade. This speaks to the high school, is that there's been an investment in adding more courses at the high school to provide more opportunity for students to take more rigorous courses. What we know from colleges and speaking with colleges is that they are looking for students to take the most rigorous course load that the students can take. And so that requires the high school to be able to provide an array of courses for students that meets their academic needs where they are, and then as they are ready to take on more rigorous courses, to have those courses available to them. And so under the leadership of Principal Jess Callanan, they have added more AP courses. And what I think is really excellent about this slide is that you will see that we have increased the number of students who are taking AP classes, and we have surpassed the passing rate, which was on the AP is a 3 or above. So we have more kids who are taking tests, and we have better scores on the AP test. That really is, there are not many school districts or schools that have that kind of data, and is quite impressive. And again, a testament to our students and our teachers, and the investment in terms of adding these courses. Next slide, please. And so overall, what you will find is that through high quality curriculum, through, I think this is pass it to Tom Wise, through other types of investments, we've seen a lot of excellent performance and outcomes from our students. And for someone who has lived this experience, I'm going to pass it to school committee member Tom Wise.
Thank you, Dr. Turner. It's interesting watching the thing. I'm now a pastor, Tom Wise, as well, so which was news to me. So I'm Tom Wise. I've been on the school committee now. This is my 8th year. I will say that I'm extraordinarily proud of the progress this district has made over that time period, and all the partnership we've demonstrated across the administration, the school committee, the teaching staff, the town, et cetera, to make that happen. A lot of what we're highlighting on this slide are the investments we've made to make what the previous slide showed possible, basically. And a lot of what we see on this slide as well was made through investments that included grants and other external sources to make it possible too. So early literacy, as an example, the state put in place a federal law back in 2018 that required certain stuff, and then they allowed for grant applications. And we have funded our early literacy growth with a large amount of grants across the state level. That led into another grant that we received from the state for about $200,000 and $2 million worth of ARPA funding to implement the ARC Core high quality curriculum instruction from for the elementary, which drove a lot of the improvements we have, in addition to the work we've done with illustrative math, and most recently rolling out Amplify ELA with regards to our middle school. There's other things that we've rolled out in addressing multilingual learners, National Geographic at the middle school as well, and there's ongoing curriculum reviews across many of our areas to make sure we have the right materials that drive our outcomes. Materials matter, and teaching practices matter, and what goes with a lot of this as well is the investment we put into the teachers, and making sure they know what and how to do the implementation. It's not just handing a product to a teacher, it's actually helping them learn it as well. Teachers are lifelong learners, and they're doing a phenomenal job in this space. In addition to that, what we've seen over the last, 4, 5, 6 years, especially post-COVID, is a very different child in the classroom. And social emotional supports have been huge to enable that. Assistant principals is one of the biggest investments we've made at the elementary level, and it fundamentally changes the game for our principals and allows them to be instructional leaders, to be in the classroom where necessary with our teachers and help them to grow in their craft as well. The adjustment counselors have been amazing as well to make sure that when the kids come to school, they are ready to perform. Understanding what it is that needs to happen, whether it's playing with basketball with them at the start of the day or otherwise sitting with them and helping them get into the classroom ready to learn in the right mode has been important. And the psychologists at the high school in particular have also been an area for growth. What people don't necessarily see is a lot of these investments also lead to savings and lead to revenue. So with special education, we've made some huge investments from a staff perspective in our special education space, both from inclusion so that kids can participate in regular ed classes, but also from a teacher and para perspective that allow us to bring other programs back. So in addition to saving money from out of district placements, which has been huge, as you saw in the previous slides, we've actually made special education a revenue center, which is kind of crazy if you actually step back and think about it. And that's a phenomenal way of what we've been able to do. One of the bigger concerns we have with the override failing is that we would have to start cutting back on some of those supports and in fact cost ourselves more money. So it becomes kind of this ripple effect of problems, and we really want to avoid that ripple effect. We've done so much work to bring our kids back in district and provide them with the right education in district, as well as bring other kids in district to help them, that we don't want to fall back from that space. And staffing cuts could in fact lead to something like that. One of the other most important things we've done from an investment perspective that helps with the AP numbers you just saw was the introduction of the innovation career pathways at the high school. Also heavily grant funded with major state grants. Jess Callanan has done a phenomenal job in getting those grants, writing the grants, and then using the money to build those programs. We have somewhere like 280 kids right now, or 295 kids or so in that program at the high school in the various different programs, whether it's engineering or health and science, health and medical or business, or we have multiple different innovation pathways now and for all different walks of life of what the kids are looking to do. And that opens up the doors of their passion, right? That can lead to those AP tests, can lead to dual enrollment options as well, and what they will want to do to expand. So, a lot of what the results, Dr. Turney's already talked about it, but we're continuing to see a rise in that. We're continuing to see early identification of our children so that if they do need IEPs earlier, we're able to get to them earlier. And in many cases, if you get to them earlier, you can help them quicker and reduce the long-term costs, as well as the benefit for the child and the family of being what's there. So our early literacy has been a huge portion of that, and that carries forward in the middle school as well. You've seen huge rises in our accountability numbers that Dr. Turner just put out there as well. Many of our schools in the last 2 years have hit their highest accountability numbers ever, which again is also quite amazing. So let's move on to the next slide from this one. So what is FY27? FY27, as it is, we're in it right now, and we had to balance it by using funds that we wouldn't otherwise use. The school district's budget was a 2.05% increase for FY27. Fortunately, town meeting gave us another 25,000 for adaptive sports, and that gave us 2.17. Woo! Right? But we had to balance what would normally be a 3.75, 3.5, 4.0 number with 800,000 of non-recurring funds. Most of that is leveraging the money from school choice a year early. So usually we take this year's school choice money and put it aside to spend next year. What we're having to do is spend last year's school choice and this year's school choice money this year, which means essentially we have no school choice money next year, which leads to the debt, which leads to the 917,000, right, of what we're ending up having to do. So that leaves us exposed going into FY28, and we will not have that to fall back on as an extra revenue source as necessary as well. So as we go into FY28, You know, the reason it says 5.25 is because we have to close that structural deficit that FY27 created. Otherwise, it would be a 3.75 number. We're essentially catching up to close that debt as it goes, right? So that's why it's a priority to get us back on level, and so we don't reuse money that can't be used again, which is not a good practice and one we wanted to avoid but had to do in order to balance the budget for FY27. It also is very important to say that we're not like putting that number out there so we can go hire a bunch of people, right? It is level service, level funding budget from our perspective as we go forward, and it will allow for, you know, the contractual increases, but nothing out of the norm. So if we move to the next slide. I think this is my last slide before I hand it off to Aaron. So again, we've talked about this again, no added bonuses, no added positions. You know, collective bargaining, cost of living increases are there and lane are assumed, but not extraordinary. We would be able to add back, you know, that we have renewable resources that need to be paid for with regards to those curriculum tools we just talked about. So there's 85,000 for that. An additional technology purchase that would be put in there, and then, you know, other regular day transportation related costs that we have that would be able to be added back as a result or part of that increase that goes into it. It's not really adding back. Sure. Question on the side here was to define lane changes. So when you look at contracts with regards to collective bargaining, there's what's called steps and lanes. So a step is when a person goes from 1 year of service to 2 years of service to 3 years of service to 4 years of service, right? And a lane is when they've gone and done more education. In our particular case, I'm sure there's other ones where you can go from a bachelor's to a master's, or to a master's with 15 credits, or a master's with 30 credits, or to a PhD, or a double master's, right? And so depending upon the additional education and therefore the additional value you're providing the district, you are moving a lane side by side, which gives you a little additional increase in the take home pay. Good. Okay. So, you know, in addition to that, some of the other things we've assumed, you know, school choice, we're going to assume that we're going to have about 128 students in school choice. That helps us get to the number from our budget perspective. So that will be just next year, right? So we'll start a process of spending school choice on a regular, on the regular year, as opposed to saving it, which at some point in time, hopefully we can get away from. Special education, incremental. So when a student opts into school choice, if they require special education support, the sending district is required to send us the money. So we don't have to pay extra cost for a student if they're coming in from school choice perspective for special education. So this assumes that we'll get that offset of 100,000 as well to keep us going. We already have been hosting the SEAM Collaborative Deaf and Hard of Hearing program at Wood End, and you know, there's a small rental fee that we get out of that. We're expecting to keep that in there as well from an offset perspective. We're expecting that we'll still keep 3 students in from special education out of district. That might be more, in which case we would have additional revenue. As it stands right now, we're expecting it to be 3. What we do lose is some other major offsets, right? Full day kindergarten will have been fully spent down as of now, and we will not have an extra offset for that. We won't have the carry forward of the school choice that we just mentioned before, and there will be an adjustment to the RISE preschool offset as well. So those cost us a loss to a degree from a year-over-year perspective, about 473. So together, those offset us and get us to that number of 62+ million that's listed there. So I'll pass it on to Erin for the next couple slides.
Thank you, Tom. So the big question, what would it mean for the Reading Public Schools if the override vote was to fail? We'd be looking at having to make a reduction of about 15 educators. That's estimating roughly 100,000 per position, which is not an exact science, but, you know, for these purposes, makes the most sense. Up to 20 paraprofessionals, which would be about 640,000, and up to 7 administrators or non-educator positions for approximately 700,000. As far as a non-staffing impact, as you saw earlier, 81% of the school budget is personnel. So there's very, very little wiggle room when it comes to non-staffing, but some things that are on the table would be increasing fees for extracurricular activities and athletics to offset the reductions that we would pull for that. Obviously, that means that those fees then get turned on to families. So it's not, not without equity issues and not without eventual costs to a lot of residents. We'd be looking at increasing facility rental fees to offset reductions. Again, what that would likely mean is that all the student athletic and other activities that take advantage of using the Reading Public Schools spaces would probably have to increase their fees, which would then in turn fall onto families. Reinstating full-day kindergarten tuition to offset reductions. That carries its own set of equity issues. In order to charge tuition for full-day kindergarten, we are obligated to then provide half-day kindergarten again. And there are many, many reasons why we worked very hard to eliminate that tuition, primarily because we feel strongly, I don't want to speak for the whole board. I feel strongly, and I believe there was discussion that the school committee feels strongly, that full-day kindergarten is the most equitable for all Reading school children as they're starting their foundation in public school. We could potentially eliminate the new laptop purchasing. We currently have a one-to-one device for our middle schoolers and high schoolers, which again, ensures everyone has a device for school and is, again, not an equity issue. It's a potential savings of $200,000. We could pause on prepay of out-of-district tuition, which would be up to $500,000. We tend to do prepays at the end of one year to set us up for success the following year. So again, this isn't something that we can sustain, but it could help us in a pinch potentially. We could draw down on the special ed reserve fund up to $300,000. Again, that fund is there for unpredicted out-of-district placements and other special ed costs that might come up during the year, as they do. So it's, not something we want to take lightly, but it's something we would look into if we had to, and use a % of current year circuit breaker funds up to $200,000. Again, this is another practice where we prefer to not spend in the current year, but if we had to, it would be a short-term solution. Next slide, please. A lot of people are asking, how are you going to make these decisions? There's a lot of opinions on what the right decision is. The answer is there's no easy decision that doesn't have some major ripple effects for the quality of instruction, education, and support that our students are getting. What we can commit to is that the administration and the school committee will absolutely be looking to stick to our values, which is being student-centered, seeking excellence for all students, continuing to look at improvements for learning, instruction, and supports for students, and continuing systems of supporting students, such as our early literacy screening and intervention. So these are things that we are committed to no matter what. We are committed to a collaborative approach. So these are not decisions that will be made lightly or without substantial input from those impacted. We are committed to being as transparent as possible. And, we continue to want to improve. We are very proud of where the schools are today, but we by no means feel like we are at the top of our game either. There's always room for improvement. So to the extent that we may be faced with making cuts, we will still be looking at how can we continue on our mission for excellence for all students. Next slide, please. More specifics around the impact in reductions. So as far as staffing, we're talking about a loss of nearly 5% of educators. Without a doubt, that would be felt throughout our school system. We'd be looking at increased class sizes and, potential loss of the middle school team model. What does that mean? It means if you cut one teacher in the middle school, you can no longer keep the team model. There's a complete imbalance, and our middle schools would have to be restructured. If you cut an elementary school teachers, then classrooms have to be rejiggered. I don't even like to say rebalanced because that's very tricky to do without potentially redistricting. And if you cut high school teachers, then 100% you're looking at larger class sizes, you're looking at fewer class options, so potentially an impact to AP offerings or elective offerings, potential impact to elementary specialists and support roles, loss of early literacy and math support that have helped tremendously with MCAS and overall academic growth. As far as paraprofessionals, it would mean fewer tutors, kindergarten paras, and office clerks that serve critical roles for our student and family support. So you take away those supports, and that's more of a burden on our classroom teachers in order to provide support for all learners in the classroom. As far as administrator, non-educator positions, we'd be looking at reduced oversight at arrival, dismissal, and recess. We'd be looking at less classroom support to respond to student behavioral needs. Again, that is something that has a huge impact on instruction and the teacher's ability to focus on the students present in the classroom. And we'd be looking at less oversight and support that have helped all the school improvements we've been talking about tonight. As far as fees, higher activity and athletic fees mean increased fees for students to participate in athletics and extracurriculars. It means financial pressure on families and inequity in who can afford to participate. To be clear, we do have an exception in place for families at certain income threshold where they are not paying fees. But that just creates more of a burden on those who are paying fees. So again, it's a huge equity issue. Threatens smaller programs and weakens offerings for families weighing options. So if we've got extracurriculars or athletics that tend to draw a smaller number of students, it makes those programs very vulnerable. And students who drop activities lose connection, belonging, and wellness benefits. I don't think I have to underscore that. As far as devices, reduced device purchasing would mean that device sharing at the elementary levels, so that can impact many of our curriculum platforms at this point are online. So that can create situations where students are getting less access to the curriculum, less access to the platforms. Less take-home access at the high school creates inequity for students. So many of the students at the high school, their one-to-one device goes back and forth with them. So if a student doesn't have something to use at home and we can't provide something for every student at the high school, then that's going to create a real problem in terms of what can be completed at home. And older devices mean higher repair costs and lost instructional time. Probably one of the greatest complaints out of the high school students would be issues with connectivity at the high school. So I can only imagine if we're looking at older issues, we're going to be looking at more problems, and that impacts learning time. As far as reserves, pausing prepay, reserves, and circuit breaker removes a safeguard in providing legally required IEP services. Unexpected placements can run $65,000 to $400,000 per student, now unprotected. if a student is placed out of district, particularly if a student is placed in a program that is also their living situation, it's a tremendous financial impact to the district. And there are times when that is absolutely in the best interest of the student, but it's not without a huge financial impact. And exposure to mid-year budget instability with no way to cover costs. So for the 5 of you who watch school committee meetings, you would know that occasionally we have to shift funds from one bucket to another in order to balance things mid-year, as you know, we're constantly monitoring how various funds are going. But the leaner those buckets get, then it becomes harder and harder to balance.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for your presentations. We are going to start the Q&A, and again, I put the instructions here on the screen. If you would like to speak, you can raise your hand. We do have some audio issues in the room, so if you are able, it may be easier to type the Q&A. And I also did realize we have a microphone for the audience if you guys have any questions. It was hidden by my computer. But does anyone in the room have questions? And then we'll transition to the Zoom if there are any questions. Oh, yeah. Or just that, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone tonight for these presentations. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure to meet you. And the town side as well. And thank you all for working together collaboratively. It's a community-wide challenge. And so what is it you always say about the dream team? And okay. My question is, I love hearing about the revenue that we're able to create for the schools. And what I'm wondering is, can we provide specifics to our community members, that the specifics as to revenues coming in? For example, in watching this presentation, we talk about how much we spend per pupil. When we bring in school choice students, are we bringing in that same dollar amount for these students? And it might be helpful to communicate that to the community. And I don't expect answers on the fly, by the way. But I have the same question in regards to bringing in special ed students. And I know that's the whole reason for the reserve fund and the enormous cost of those. And some helpful information was provided about the other school districts needing to pick up those costs. I'm just wondering, as we move forward in this conversation, if we could provide some information that these are programs that are in fact helping the bottom line once you look at all of the costs. And it can be fairly simple because these are pretty detailed slides, and people, you know, have a certain amount of attention spans, but I don't see that, and I haven't seen that. And thank you for all of the great improvements that you've made with the AP classes and the extra support for the students and our educators. And you know, after 7 years on the select board, I've seen the investments that have been made. And you know, my child graduated in 2018, and some of these things would have been great back then. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I would just say thank you for the question and for the feedback. I'll be clear, and then I'll on one thing, and then share with my colleagues, is that for special education out of district students who are coming to Reading, their district is paying for the student, all aspects of the student. So the costs, there are no costs that are coming onto the Reading Public Schools. So in terms of your question of how does that factor into per pupil, I'll pass that to I don't know if Tom or Phil would like to speak to it.
Well, can you hear me? As the superintendent said, if we talk about school choice, I mean, for the last 30 years, the receiving district gets $5,000 per student. And then if there are special ed costs, those are added on top, and then we charge back those special ed costs to the student's home district. So in terms of special ed, there is no hit to our bottom line. And in terms of the school choice students, again, there's no hit to our bottom line because we're looking at the incremental costs, of which if we add one student coming in, it doesn't really add much to our costs. So one of the things that we do is every year we look at the enrollments that we have in all our classrooms, look where we might have seats available to bring a student in. So, if if we have a classroom that has 16 students, we might think that we could add another student. We don't need to hire a teacher, and the only incremental cost we're going to have might be some consumables. So in terms of school choice, yes, those are adding to our bottom line, so to speak. And then in terms of these, as superintendent also referred to, for any special ed students that are coming in, if they're coming into one of our programs, we have priced that program to make sure that we're covering all the costs. And then when we initially did it, I told the special ed director to add 10% on top of that so that we would make sure that we are covering all our costs. And for example, we had a student who came in last year that required a one-to-one para. Well, we hired the para, but that cost was charged back to the sending district for that. So we're very careful in terms of all these programs to make sure that we're not incurring costs that exceed our revenues. So yes, they all are accruing to the bottom line positively.
Follow-up question. Thank you. That's very helpful. So does the school district, any school district who offers school choice, do you all determine what we charge families coming in?
For school choice?
Yeah.
No, the 5,000 is set by statute. And that was set probably 30 years ago.
Ah.
So, it would be nice if the legislature would, perhaps change that a little bit.
I'd like to add on to that. Is it also true that special education students, when they come in, help create a cohort so that, a former school committee member, so that when we're doing our special education programs, it's less likely to have students go out of district because we have a cohort internally where we can meet that need. So it in effect can save us out of district programming dollars. Is that a true statement?
That's a true statement. I'll just share someone who has been in a large district for a long time coming to, I know some people see Reading as a large district. For me, it feels like a smaller district.
Very
Is that it's hard. I know it's hard. It's hard to keep sometimes students in district when their profile is that they are the only one in the community. So to your point is that when we bring students in with similar profiles of a student, it definitely helps with keeping students in the district. And what we know is that families want their students to be Reading Rockets, right? They want their students to be in Reading. That's clear with our data. And so absolutely that this out of district programming of bringing students in from other communities helps to allow for us to keep students in district.
Just quickly adding to that, I think we've seen that in particular in our 18 to 22 program, which many people may know we used to actually share with Wakefield, and we got out of that agreement and now host our own program and have people coming in for that. But also, it doesn't necessarily do it for cohorts at other programs. Like we've had kids come in for LEAD, which is our dyslexia program, right? If you think about that program, 11 years ago, we had an OCR filing and read against that program. Now we have kids coming from other districts to that program. So think about the switch of the organization and how we've made great strides in that space. So that is not necessarily a cohort case as much as people want to come into that district program because it's so strong at this point in time.
I can share just one more thing is that it's also important to recognize that we're not for-profit school, right? And so the idea is not to have as many to generate as much revenue as possible here. It has to be thoughtfully done so that we're not taking spaces from students who live in Reading, that we are not adding additional costs to the district. And so I don't know if there's a question out there of like, can we just keep adding more students to this, and that that poses significant challenge to the district. So it's clearly that it's been thoughtfully done in terms of how we have brought students into the district.
Test. Ah, there we go. Okay, so I'm a community member, and so I've been trying to educate myself on this override process. And it's hard. There's a lot of information that you folks are presenting here, and obviously you're advocating for it. Generally, the consensus from at least my interpretation is everyone sitting here is obviously advocating for this override. So I had a lot of questions during the slides, unfortunately. And I was trying to think of things as they were coming up. But one of the items that I was considering is the number of times that a request for the override has come up. So now we have this one and what, $6.5 million. So how long before you think the next one would be requested? It does seem like, again, from my point of view, as a community member who's lived in Reading for about 16 years, my kids went through the Reading Public Schools and, you know, they were barely pretty good. But it seems like all the costs are constantly going up, constantly going up. And there's an ask for more money, more money, more money. So it's going to affect all of us in the community. Myself personally, I would affect me. You know, the tax rate goes up, I have to pay more. So it just seems like there's this endless request for more money. So, and you obviously you have the point where, you know, the sky's falling if you don't get it. If it doesn't happen, you're going to have to abolish this amount of people that can't work, and I just wonder, like, maybe we have to start tightening your belts. Maybe things have to change so that you have to consider that you're taking more money from people who don't necessarily have that money. I mean, Reading is a pretty affluent community, as we all can agree, right? Average home is probably what, $1 million. So probably they all have the money to spend for, you know, they can send their kids, and if they have to pay more for athletics, for example, they can shell it out because they probably do have that money. But there's probably people like myself who is not wealthy. I'm a renter, but my landlord will have to raise my rent because if this goes through. So I just think sometimes you forget that. You forget the point that there are many of us who can't afford to keep increasing the cost, keep taking more from it. Perhaps you can. Perhaps folks like yourselves have $1 million homes and you're comfortable. But I don't think there are many people in Reading who feel similarly. And so I do think you have to look at perhaps tightening the belt a little bit more. I know I looked at a poll when I first came in here. 61% right now say no for the override. 61%. This was based on the information I had from a website that was describing the override. So there seems to be a trend right now not to support them, not to support them. And I've seen there's many other communities that have rejected them as well. And I do think you have to consider it. Again, I have many questions specifically to the items. There's a lot of information, but I just think from my point of view, I just wanted to share that. I appreciate the information you're sharing. Obviously, you're looking at it from your perspective. You know, you're looking at it from the schools. They need this money for that. They need this money for that. And I think you forget about the people who have to pay for that. And I think you have to consider it, because I do think that there is the trend not to approve the override. That's for me as a community member. So that's what I have.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and your experience and your understanding. You said you had a number of questions, and I'm sure as you go back through and you look at the information later, please ask us. We have an email for that, override@readingma.gov. We want to hear your questions. I really do appreciate your input and your insight. We have not forgotten that there are folks that this is a burden on. This ask would be a tremendous burden. I hold office hours at Town Hall and at the Pleasant Street Center every month. And I spoke with people, my office hours today at the Pleasant Street Center. I sat down and spoke with some of our elders who, you know, it's a real challenge for some of them. And we do have programs for senior tax relief. And, but it is something that I definitely talk about every single day. And so I would like to assure you that I have not forgotten that. Our staff has not forgotten that. We understand the ask that's before you. I do also think that the select board has demonstrated when they put this item before the community. There was a long conversation. I think it took two extra meetings to come to a consensus of where they wanted to go, because there has been the debt exclusion that was put forward for the Killam School and the recal. And so that was a big increase that hit people's tax bills in July. And so the timing is imperfect. But we have to, before we make drastic cuts that we will need to make, we think the community has a right to weigh in on that first. And so that's the intention of the override. Here's what we're looking at in terms of consequences. Here's some fiscal discipline and some new policy ideas that I've put forward for the Finance Committee to take up under consideration. For example, not spending more money out of free cash to supplement our budget than exceeds capital expenditures. And there are reasons for that. But that is a more sustainable model. So right now we're using about $3.5 million more in free cash than what we're spending in capital. And that's an unsustainable model. So making some policy changes that creates stability. One of the questions you asked at the beginning was, how long do we think this would last? So the last override that passed in 2018 was about the same. It was a smaller amount than had happened 15 years prior. And the estimate was about 3 to 5 years. And, you know, we've made it last almost 9 years because we're looking at FY28. So part of that was because we received ARPA funds and ESSER funds, one-time monies through COVID, helped stretch that dollar. Additionally, for the most part, particularly on the town side, we have been level services, but also level funded. Many different lines, most lines haven't grown. And so what we've seen is our regeneration every year reduce because as costs go up, like postage, something very mundane, what we pay to send out, you know, bills to residents, or newsletters, things like that, those costs have gone up. And so less money goes back to free cash. We regenerate less money. And so we haven't increased, we don't have bloat. We have been, I think, as a town, the Finance Committee, the Select Board, and staff have worked together to reduce those costs over time. But again, if we're looking at a $9.8 million structural deficit next year, we're going to have to make significant cuts, and that will be felt by everybody in the community too. And so the community, we believe, has a right to weigh in on where they want to go. And so we're putting our best foot forward to give people their information and the opportunity fairly. And staff will do what the residents ask us to do. Does that help answer your question? Does that give you some comfort, I hope? There are. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yep.
You don't have the direct connection to the, to your mortgage and the costs, right? But your landlord is ultimately going to change. He's going to, who's not even here. My landlord's not sitting. He doesn't have a clue about what's going to happen here in Reading. It's just going to happen, and then he ultimately is going to pass those costs on where I can't afford. In fact, I'm heading towards retirement in my right now. So those kinds of things have to, are part of my thinking, and I think many other people. But, there is a large tax base that probably would consider it. But I understand your points, and everyone here who shared, the sky is falling, right? If things don't pass, I understand.
One thing that I heard, and thank you very much for your comments. particularly since you said that you had children who were who had been in the district. I do want to offer myself up in our team to to answer questions about how schools are different now and where some of those costs are coming from, particularly as things have changed post-COVID. And one thing that I heard from you is sort of the impact that it has on the taxpayer and on citizens who can't pay these taxes. And I think that that's very fair feedback, and that to know that we don't take that lightly. Personally, I don't live in Reading, but I am a taxpayer in another community, and so I do understand what you're talking about, a community that just had an override conversation. So it does feel, what you're talking about does feel real. I will also just share is that like our responsibility is to make sure that we're informing, not to persuade, but to inform. And one thing that I think it's important to know is that, because you were talking about tightening our belts, is that what Erin was just sharing is that 81% of our budget on the school side is staff. And so there aren't a lot of places where we can make reductions that aren't going to directly impact an adult's work with kids. And so that's what makes this really challenging. And if we are tasked to make those reductions, it will make it really hard. And I think you heard that in, because it's the school committee that makes those approvals for reductions. You heard that from Tom and from Erin in terms of how difficult that will be. And we'll have a direct impact on sort of our service for students. But I just want to just echo that to know that it's that there's not a way that we can make this level of reduction without it impacting the people who work in the district.
Understood. I don't want to monopolize the time. I think there's other people who probably have questions here. To the point about the academics in general, there is a general understanding that college is not the wherewithal for students. This discussions here has all been, let's get advanced placement for our students. We want to elevate them for basically preparing all of our students for college. And I think all of us here have seen and experienced that college is not necessarily the answer. My kids went through college. They're not even working in their fields, but they have $60,000 more of debt, right? Because the drive was get to college. I too had that same formula: go through school, get to college, get a degree, and be successful in society. That ain't happening anymore. I think that perhaps to revisit what is the purpose of the education, right? What can they do once they graduate? Do they need to go to college? Does every student who comes through Reading need to go to college? Probably not. Probably many of them need to vocational, learn a specific trade, plumbing, electricity, something of that nature. So perhaps, again, this is something to consider, is maybe we don't need all these advanced placement classes. Maybe what we need is some kind of vocational training so that they don't graduate with $60,000 or more of debt and their degrees are useless. So I think that, again, there's something to be considered about what is the purpose of a high school education, right? And what can these students do at the end of it? Perhaps many of them don't need to go to college. Again, I don't want to monopolize your time here, and I appreciate everything. Just stuff that I've been thinking about, and I appreciate the floor. So I'll turn the mic back over to whomever here. So.
Before you turn the mic over, I'd love to know your name, because I'd love to sit down and talk with you at some point in time.
My name is Fred Johnson.
Fred, okay. First of all, thank you, Fred, for giving the feedback. I think it's really important that we hear it, right? On this last point, I think I want to say a couple of things that are really important. A, I agree with you, right? College is not the be all and end all for every student. And I think we've demonstrated that with the innovation pathways as well. It actually is helping kids to learn whether or not this field is what they want to go into or not. And if they do, is there a shorter path for them to get from that to the profession they're wanting to do? Whether that's nursing or engineering. Engineering can often lead to something else, right? So that's been one of our purposes with some of the innovation pathways. We've had other conversations, and part of the conversation was how much the VOC cost increases that actually drive our stuff. So it's an interesting juxtaposition if you think about that, right? Part of our problem is we're actually having more kids go to the voc, which is driving our costs, right? So it's an interesting problem in that space. But one of the things that we often miss when we talk about AP is in fact driving your $60,000 number too, is when a kid is passing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 AP classes in high school, that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 classes they don't have to take in college. And they can spend a third, 3 years in graduating college instead of 4, right? So it also becomes a savings for the family in that regard if that child decides that college is the right path for them, right? But we're trying to address both sides of the equation, which is one of the great things about the innovation pathways is it gives them more opportunity to learn what they're really interested in early. It's not an obligatory, you must take English 101 class in many cases, right? It becomes more in alignment with their interests. And they can say, yeah, this actually fits what I want to do. Or, I've learned and I'm not wasting a year in college trying to figure out if this is what I want to do, right? Which is, I think, something that often people don't understand about the innovation career pathways that are really, really powerful to hit exactly to your point, right? It's not every kid is going to go to college, but if they do go to college, they will have achieved a year potentially of savings in doing so.
If I could just, Josh, real quick. I don't think Fred is monopolizing any of the time, even though you might think so. I've said this only a handful of times before. The opportunity for us to actually get somebody that I don't know their name into this room or any other room that I've been in for the last 5 years is astronomical. There's only been like 3 or 4 people, you're now the fourth, that has ever come before me where I didn't already know what they were going to say, how they were going to react. I'm going to counter them in my head as they're talking and just in one ear out the other. Like, honestly, you are the person that the town has to be targeting because there is a silent majority of people that are in your position that can't afford this. And I am waffling on my own decision to put the override on the ballot. I honestly am. And it's, there's only been 2 or 3 different other things that I regret, and the jury is out on this one. But I honestly think that what you said, it really has to resonate. And we have to convince you that this is the direction it's supposed to go, not the both polarizing ends of the spectrum. It's your vote that's going to end up deciding this override. And if it passes, it passes. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. It is what it is. But for you to come here, I really appreciate your time and perspective because everybody in this room has to hear it. Because a lot of people are just thinking this is a walk in the park. And as you just explained at the beginning of this, it does not look like it's going that direction. But, I really appreciate you being here and don't stop advocating or speaking and showing up to things. So thank you.
Sorry about that. My Zoom disconnected. I'm about to share the screen, but Marianne, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Marianne Downing. I'm the chair of the FinCom, but I'm speaking as myself, not on behalf of FinCom. And my comments are in 2 areas, one about benefits and one about the schools. So what I was concerned with the slide, I think Aaron addressed it on the cuts to the schools. I've probably asked about this before, but I was just looking at some numbers. So maybe this is for Dr. Turner, maybe this is just for the group's consideration. At the time of the override in 2018, our school population was 4,213 students. And the number of teacher FTEs we had, and this is per DESI, was 305.6. So in fiscal year 26, we were down to 3,862 students. So that's a decrease of 351 students, basically an elementary schools full of students. And yet we had 18 more teacher FTEs, 323 teacher FTEs. So when I looked at the teacher to student ratio, and maybe this explains, in combination with other things, some performance improvements. At the time of the 2018 override, it was 13.8 to 1 student teacher ratio, and now it's down to 11.9 to 1. So not a huge decrease, but seeing that we have 351 fewer students, regardless of if our students are much more troubled from COVID and more needy and this and that, we have a lot fewer students in our district, and we have more teacher FTEs. So I would submit that there has to be a way, and I don't want the override to not pass. I know we need the money, but there has to be a way to deal with if it doesn't pass without the level of radical cuts. That's just my personal opinion when I see how many students we used to have and what we have now. It would be one thing if it was like 100 students, or I know, and our student population now, as everyone was talking about with the school choice and the other students coming in, what would it be if we didn't have those students? Just like the rest of the state, we're on a downward trend. And I feel like we could make this work without the level of staff. Sorry, my work phone's going off here. The other question I have is on benefits, because that clearly jumped out at the start of the meeting. Sharon provided a very helpful graph, what was increasing more than expected. And I appreciate that the town has expressed that they've negotiated with the unions to bring down healthcare costs. I think it was 3.8 or 3.9 million. I believe I heard them say when they explained that they finally have a deductible. And please, someone from the town side, correct me if I'm wrong, that apparently they didn't have a deductible before. Those of us in the private sector, not only do we have increasing deductibles, most of us, our employers, the main choice, unless you want to pay more, is what's called a high deductible health plan, which really brings the healthcare costs down for employers. So my question to the town is, have you discussed the idea of offering a high deductible health plan option as a way to further bring down the healthcare costs? So that was my
Marian, thanks
question.
for the questions. I'll go first really quickly, and then the school department can answer your student teacher ratio question. So as I said earlier, health insurance has to be bargained. We have to have the unions agree through our public employee committee to make changes to the health insurance. So the change to a deductible this year, which is, and we have a 3-year agreement. That's the first time there's ever been a deductible, and it's the first plan change. So there were other plan changes that happened in 35 years.
I understand
So-
you explained that. It's just that I think you.
So, but yeah, so you're very quiet in the rooms. We're all very, very quiet because we can barely hear you, just so you know. So yes, I know that a previous town manager under Bob LeLacheur had once thought about introducing a high deductible plan. And I know in some municipalities, the way that they often do this is they fund the first year of that deductible upfront for employees, so that, because otherwise it accrues throughout the year. And so it makes that harder to accept at the bargaining table. It's something that we can think about proposing down the road. What I will say is that our Public Employee Committee is made up of a lot of Reading residents who understand the financial problem and the times that we're in. And we're motivated to make changes and work with the town to make these changes to see savings, not only for the town, but for the employees individually as well, because the increasing costs of health insurance are exceeding their annual increases in their benefits, in their payment, their income. So for employees, everybody was motivated to make changes here. We'll continue to always look at options and evaluate them with our Public Employee Committee, but you make a very interesting point. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, it's just that if the override doesn't pass, that is also going to be a message to the unions that the residents may say, hey, we can't even afford things in our private life, and we're going to fund something else. And it should be on the table, even if they're not bargaining for it. And as for the schools, I guess I don't know if it's a question. What do they think about the change that we've had such a drop in students in the last 6
I was
years,
gonna
but
address
not
that
really
for
a drop
Reading.
in staff?
Yeah, Marianne, I think this is a conversation you and I've had a few different times, but I'll rehash a few points of this for awareness, right? 2018 was after multiple years of cuts pre-override. So we have to consider that as a background of your starting point in terms of the staff numbers that were there. And we also can look at the school's performance dropping throughout that period of time as well as those staff cuts were going on and say, is that what we want? Maybe, maybe not. I would argue not. If we talk about the staff increases over that period of time, they've been heavily in the special education space, which allows us to keep our kids in district and reduce costs and also bring other revenue in, as we've talked about today as well. It's not one-to-one necessarily between the 305 and 323 that you mentioned, but it's pretty heavily in that space. And if you then go back and look at your number from a student perspective, the 351, I agree there has been a decrease. But if you take that 351 and you do it over 12 grades, really 13 grades, but I'll just say 12 for the sake of argument right now, that's 30 kids per grade, right? So then you go, okay, I've got 2 middle schools. That's 15 kids per middle school. So that means I've got 5 kids per grade. You're not going to let go of a teacher or collapse a class with 5 kids at a grade in the middle school. You go to the elementary school, now I've got 6 kids per school, which is 1 kid per grade. So, you know, the numbers, when you actually break it down, don't mean a class collapse or anything else along those lines. And you know, you've been watching us for a long time. We review the numbers from a classroom size perspective across the board every single year. We ask these questions, you know, is there something that should be moved here? Are we overburdened there? Are we underburdened there? Every single year from a class size perspective as well. If there ever comes a point where we can start talking about other things, then so be it. We will have that conversation, but now is not that time. And is there something as we look at some of this that says, okay, you can adjust certain things, perhaps, right? Which is part of the reason why Dr. Turner and the administrative team have put some of the numbers on the table that they are. But to think that they're less severe than they're currently listed at, depending upon what happens with if a override does not pass, I think is incorrect and inaccurate, and it would not be anywhere close to a $4 million savings to, you know, cut 1 or 2 teachers to achieve a classroom number that you're talking about.
Well, Tom, I appreciate that, but I don't think the drop has been linear in all of the schools. I mean, I only looked while you were speaking real quickly at Wood End, and I hate to, like, I know I brought up Wood End at the last forum, so I'm not trying to pick on Wood End, but in 2018, Wood End had 290 kids. In 2026.
Yep.
It had 231. I misspoke, I think, in a previous forum and said 221. That was my bad eyes. But that's a 60 kid drop. And that, again, it may be distributed over the grades, but I think if there could be like redistricting to that school as a bigger capacity and to kind of, I don't know, even things out more in the schools, if it has to mean a reduction of a class or a
Redistricting is a
shifting.
tool. The superintendent has it at his disposal if he needs to do so, right? Wood End would be potentially redistrict from either Killam or Birch, right, as a location perspective.
Well, I mean, just add more
it's-
kids to that school, right? Or like if other schools are, I don't know.
Yeah, it's always like, can't you do this? Can't you do that? We're playing Jenga, right? Could we do it? There's certainly things we could. I think the grand scheme of the conversation is not going to be a $4 million hole filler, right? As we look at it. And as things are right now between Killam, Birch, and Wood End, yes, we acknowledge that Wood End has a lower student per teacher number, but overall it has not hit the number where we can collapse classroom sizes and still stay within our teacher-student ratios that we've set in place.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. I don't know if
We
there's
have
other
no
questions.
hands up on Zoom. Anyone else in the room would like to say anything? Anyone at the table?
It is 7:04, and I love being right on time. I do want to let folks know that they should check out the website. As you see up there, readingma.gov, FY28 override is our override hub. There's a lot of information on there. There's a memo from me right at the top that details a lot of the information we've heard tonight. There's so much more information there, and our tax calculator is live today. This is the town's tax calculator where people can estimate what their taxes would be if the override were to pass. It also includes the CPA, which will be on, that's the Community Preservation Act question, and that is also on the ballot come November. So I want to thank everybody for participating and all of their time today, and the folks online and our members of our boards, committees, and commissions who have made the time to be here for our residents as well as staff. Thank you. Yep, you can adjourn now.
Motion to adjourn FinCom?
Second,
Second.
okay, I'll call it in the room first. I think Joe Carnahan,
Yes.
Chris Cook.
Yes.
Okay, then online we have Emily Sisson,
Yes.
Ed Ross.
Yeah.
And Marianne. We are adjourned.
Motion to adjourn.
Second by Karen Herrick. Karen Herrick,
Yes.
Chris Haley,
Yes.
Melissa Murphy, yes.